Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 24. Nick's reaction to my statement showed me he'd not slowed down any since my death. His face registered shock for a moment, followed almost instantly by disbelief. Then his hazel eyes narrowed, and he studied me for a moment. He even bent his knees slightly, lowering his eye level to bring me back up to my proper height. I knew there was something familiar about the voice on the phone yesterday. Sorry about that, but it had to be done. The woman who introduced us gently touched Nick's elbow. The briefing, sir? Nick dismissed her curtly. There will be plenty of time for briefings on the way back to Mars. She looked puzzled. But you're not going to. I am now, Agnes. Clear my schedule for the next 3 weeks. I'll call my wife and explain it to her myself. Right now, Mr. Dent and I have a lot to discuss. As she retreated, Nick steered me to a corner of the room. What happened? We had a funeral and everything. There wasn't an empty seat. Actually, there were 8 open places. What? I've seen the video. It was a beautiful eulogy, even with the brother references edited out. I kept a pleasant grin on my face despite the conflicting emotions crashing around inside of me. I never intended to betray you. Nor have I. I only learned of our connection yesterday. I saw from the sharpening of his features that he didn't fully accept my explanation, so I went into more detail. A year and a half ago, Cybertronic found my body dumped into the street. I was dead from massive head and spinal trauma. They identified me and put me back together, physically, but my brain was still a bit messed up. I wasn't quite myself. While Cybertronic did see my regaining knowledge of who I had been as important to my full recovery, they concentrated on my rehabilitation for the first year. By then, I didn't want to know who I was because I thought that would destroy me somehow. That struck a chord with Nick. When you went deep cover on ops, you never wanted to resurface until things were over. You were good at submerging your real self so you'd not be exposed by a slip. That explains how I managed to resist Cybertronic's efforts to bring me to the fore again. My hands curled into fists. The last thing I remember is leaving your apartment. What happened after that? Nick sighed and tipped his face toward the tiled ceiling as he forced his mind back. You were out of touch for a couple of days, which wasn't unusual. Then we had a call from the Lunacy morgue. They said you'd been in an accident and there had been a mix-up with another body. So you were cremated before we had a chance to identify you. The coroner told me you'd been pretty messed up, so it was just as well. They gave us your ashes. We had a funeral. Okay, that's the cosmetic stuff. What did you find out? Nick hesitated. Nothing useful. I reached out and firmly grabbed his shoulders. Nick, this is me, Quentin. I look a little different, and you're not expecting me to be here, but it is me. How do I truly know that? Nick, I know you have a small black dot on your back from where you asked me to give you a tattoo during your fascination with stories about Yakuza on old Earth. You were 17 and wanted to impress Susie Coulson. That's a story my brother used to tell from time to time. His face sharpened with concentration. When did you lose your virginity? You're going to say it was when I was 16, after my future executives of Capital Cotillion with Patty Lyons. That's when it was. I shook my head. Actually, it wasn't. What? I swallowed hard. Remember when you were sick and asked me to talk Susie Coulson into visiting you by asking her to bring you review notes for your physiology exam? Vaguely. Well, she decided to use me as study aid to review the chapters on human sexuality. You lie. You could ask her, I guess. I let my hands fall back to my sides. I never told you because you had this thing for her, and I realized after the fact that I would have hurt you. Nick remained stone-faced. Then why did you do it? Well, at the time I was angry with you for ordering me around to do your dirty work. I thought it was fitting revenge. And it was fun to be able to do something you'd not been able to do. I blushed, and she was cute as hell, and I was 15 and full of hormones. He reached out and gently cuffed me, as had been his wont in our youth. Okay, Quentin, if you'd stuck with the Patty Lyons story, I would have known you were lying. My mouth opened in surprise. You knew about Susie and me? How and for how long? I never told that story to anyone. I know, and I appreciate you sparing my feelings. Nick folded his arms across his chest. Sandra threw a party for Anna before we got married, a bachelorette party, and Susie was invited. After some drinking, heavy drinking, they started swapping stories about horrible things they had done to boyfriends or guys who had been interested in them. Susie confessed to having seduced you. Anna told me about it after you died. We laughed and cried a bit. He glanced down for a second. Then his eyes met mine. And it's just as well you were dead at the time, because I would have killed you for doing that to me. We both burst out laughing at the mock anger in his voice. Nick balled a fist and raised it theatrically as if he was going to hit me. But before he could even feign a punch, Ash grabbed his wrist. "Oh, Ash, stop it." The Attila unit looked at me. "Maintenance of your structural integrity is a prime operational directive." "That's fine, Ash. I appreciate your attention to detail, but this man won't hurt me." Identification and analysis indicates Nicholas Sebastian Kell is rated .347 on the Norris Lethality Index in unarmed combat. Ignore this NLI, Ash. He wouldn't hurt me. Nick threw his arm around my shoulder. "That's right, we're brothers. If we fight among ourselves, it's only so we sharpen each other up to deal with outsiders who would hurt us." Nick did get up and address the team briefly. He told us that we'd be heading to Mars on the Red Corsair and would arrive there roughly a week after Lorraine Coven. Because of her condition, she was being sent to a private hospital in San Dorado. Once on the planet, we would make arrangements to bring her back to Luna, and the Red Corsair would remain on the planet until we were ready to return. San Dorado, capital's capital on Mars, sat between the Mariner Valley and the dry reach of plains known as the Erythrium Sea. Though small in comparison with Luna City, San Dorado is still the second largest city in the solar system. Like Luna City, it is a bustling metropolis that has plenty of facilities for each of the corporations, but we'd all have local contact people to help us once we got there. Even though none of us expected trouble in bringing Lorraine Coven back, we would all be traveling with a full complement of personal combat equipment. Since we were officially a cartel operation, we could elect to use weapons that had been developed exclusively for the use of cartel doom troopers. While I elected to stay with Cybertronic weapons, I was not surprised when I learned Jan had decided to add a plasma carbine to her personal weapons manifest. Within 3 days, the whole lot of us embarked on the Red Corsair from Mars. Aside from daily briefings on the Martian situation, including data on the presence of a Dark Legion citadel, I should have been able to see from the simulated heights of Carl's Martian hideaway, we were largely left to ourselves. Most of us spent our time socializing in the ship's lounge, though an information packet my brother gave me after liftoff occupied a fair amount of my time. It contained copies of everything he had been able to learn in his investigation of my death. He had been more than diligent in trying to learn what happened to me. He located some people who reported seeing me get into a black Vinciano Truffaut sedan with darkened windows. That wasn't usual. All of the Bauhaus luxury vehicles had darkened windows, and half the senior executives in Luna City owned one. The other half just lusted after the cars, and I knew plenty of people who had them. The witnesses didn't remember license tags, and the description of the driver as being an older man meant it could have been just about anyone from Capital to any other corp. Nick concentrated on the possibility that someone from one of the deep cover jobs I had done recognized me and had killed me. The accident story didn't seem right to him, and the witness said I'd been in no distress when I entered the vehicle, so he assumed I knew the driver. He had been able to determine that I'd not visited home since I left his place, so he knew I had been taken shortly after he last saw me. Nick's subsequent investigation left him with nothing. Everyone who had had a revenge motive checked out with alibis. Because there had been a finding of accidental death in my case, Capital was reluctant to spend much money on continuing investigation. As this leads petered out to nothing, Nick stopped digging. It felt strange to be reading about my death and feeling very detached from it. I should have been outraged because when Cybertronic found my body, it was fresh. Given the time of my disappearance, it meant I could have been held for upward of 24 to 36 hours before being killed. That suggested interrogation, and even though I had been trained in ways to resist, I knew there was a limit to human endurance. I must have suffered unbelievably, but without being able to recall the pain and torture, the anger my brutal death should have spawned wasn't there. Before, I didn't want to know about my death. Now, in knowing all there was to know, I was faced with a gap that I probably could never fill. While my death was a traumatic event, I had no way to touch the trauma, and that meant my death became nothing more than a transformative event. And given the way I went through the transformation, it was as if I had gone to sleep one day and woken up 18 months later, better than I had been before. I could recall times when relationships had soured and crumbled apart. The pain crushed me down into depression. I'd not want to eat or do anything. All I was capable of doing was hurting, even though I knew I had to get on with my life. There seemed no reason to put an effort into it. What I fervently wished during those times was that I could wake up a month or two down the line and be fully recovered. Gain without pain. Of course, the saying older than the corpse themselves still applies. There's no such thing as a free lunch. While I'd not suffered the pain of my death, Parabellum Rex had suffered being incomplete because of it. I realized he sought to protect me from the pain by absorbing it all himself, as fear of dying again. He sheltered me and filtered enough of the pain out that I was able to recover. Once I was strong enough to challenge him for control, he knew his job had been done, and he surrendered to me. My death shifted from being an object of fear or a source of anger into being a mystery that I might never be able to solve. I accepted that fact and knew I'd poke around in the mystery when I returned to Luna, but I'd not push too hard. Dying again, trying to figure out how I died the first time would be stupid. If I was going to die again, I wanted it to count for something, like protecting and helping Sandra lead a normal life. On final approach to San Dorado's Rutan Space Center, I joined my brother in his suite. Once we came in range of the city's communications network, he placed a call to the Morenci Clinic and channeled it through the video monitor in his cabin. A youngish switchboard operator put us through to Dr. Rajiv Singh's office. "Hello, Dr. Singh. This is Nicholas Kell with Capital. We spoke 2 weeks ago when I told you we were sending you a patient." The dark-haired woman nodded. "I remember. I see you're calling from the Red Corsair. You decided to accompany the patient yourself then?" "No." Nick leaned as far forward as the landing belts would allow. "Elizabeth Walters was sent to you on the Black Queen." "Oh no, Mr. Kell, she was not. We got a message from you saying there had been a delay, and she had not embarked on the Black Queen as planned." "But she did, Doctor." My brother stared at the man in the monitor. "I put her on the ship myself." Dr. Singh held his hands up helplessly. "This message came from Capital's Rutan office. We assumed you would inform us once alternate transportation had been arranged. I'm sorry." "Thank you, Doctor. Her case sounds very interesting. If you find her, Mr. Kell, do bring her by." "I will, Doctor." Nick closed the connection and killed the static-filled monitor. "She got there, Quentin. I had reports all the way, and confirmation of her arrival." "Okay, you know she made it to Mars." "Right, she's on Mars. But where?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I hope we find a good answer fast. If Ragathol and the Dark Legion figured out she's here, her location is likely to change fast. And even if this little crew we have with us can find her again, we aren't likely to be able to get her back." Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 24, End.